Hello, everyone. This is Hillary welcoming you to another episode of It's Not As You Perceive. I hope you have been well and blessed and had a great week. I thank you for joining me today in this episode of our study on the Gospel of the Kingdom of God. This is part 9. And today, we're continuing to focus on the relationship of the feasts of Jehovah to the gospel of the kingdom of God. In our last episode, we covered the feast of unleavened bread relative to the gospel of the kingdom of God. But today, we will be focusing on the first fruits relative to the gospel of the kingdom of God. Specifically, we will be focusing on the Wave Sheaf offering and the heave offering. So let's get started. Some of the points we made last time in our study were the fact that Yeshua resurrected after 72 hours in the grave, counting from twilight on Wednesday to twilight on Shabbat, confirming Yeshua's words to the leaders of the Jews that the only sign that they would receive as his authority is the sign of Jonah. Just like Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, in the same way, the Son of Man would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And because Jehovah appointed the activities of the Passover to take place on Aviv 14, we have every reason to believe that his word is true and was fulfilled because his word cannot return to him void. So I believe that it was fulfilled precisely as he said it would because Jehovah cannot lie. Another point that we made last time was that Yeshua, at the time of his resurrection, was already God's appointed high priest because he was ordained during his ministry on the Mount of Transfiguration with his 3 disciples witnessing the ceremony with Moses and Elijah. All 3 of them saw the same thing, and all 3 of them heard the voice of Jehovah say, "This is my beloved Son, Shema him." So when they all heard that, they knew for sure that Yeshua was in the presence of his Father and that he was meeting with Moses and Elijah. As a matter of fact, Peter was so excited with the ceremony that he suggested that they just stay right there, and he would build a sukkah for each of them. 3 sukkahs, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So we know that this experience that the disciples had with Yeshua on the Mount of Transfiguration was not a dream, it was a real experience. It was a true experience because all 3 of them saw the same thing, heard the same thing, remembered the same thing, had a conversation about it with Yeshua, and Yeshua charged them not to share their experience with anyone. As high priest, Yeshua was expected to carry out his high priestly duty on the Wave Sheaf day. What was his duty as high priest on this day? We saw that there were resurrected saints of old who had gotten up out of the grave, and people saw and recognized them and saw them walking towards the holy city. So because this was a day when these people were resurrected, this was the first day of the week, and this was the first fruits, and this is the Wave Sheaf day, as high priest, we expect that these resurrected saints will be going to heaven. Now, Yeshua had said to Mary, don't touch me because I have not yet ascended to my Father in heaven. At the time they had that conversation, it was before dawn, very early in the morning, the first day of the week. So we think that the duties that Yeshua had to carry out on that day were at least two things that he had to do. One, we see the resurrected saints, so we know they have to go up. So we expect nobody else but Yeshua to take them up. As high priest, he is more than qualified to go and present them before Jehovah as first fruits. Now, our lesson today, we're going to focus on the Wave Sheaf offering and the heave offering. So in today's lesson now, let's look at what Yeshua did on this day as high priest and as the resurrected Messiah. Okay, we know that we are currently in the Feast of Unleavened Bread on this day when the people see these people walking. It's first fruits. It's Wave Sheaf Day, and the people have resurrected, and this is during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is also a pilgrimage feast. Okay, so we have 5 things going on here. Yeshua, upon resurrecting, he was buried with nothing. He had nothing in his hands. He wasn't buried with a backpack of stuff. So he woke up, he was without clothes, and he was without possessions. He had nothing. The people who killed him were the Sanhedrin who ruled, the religious day and were in charge of the temple and the synagogue and anything that would have to do with the sacrifices and any gifts that would be offered, whether it be from the harvest or not. They would have all those things. Yeshua is now awaking or resurrecting to a new body with nothing in his hands, no possessions or anything. But as high priest, he has to do the work of the high priest. Now, the law tells in Deuteronomy 16 that any man who comes to the pilgrimage feast, and there were 3 of them, unleavened bread, Pentecost, and tabernacles. But this now we're at unleavened bread. So anyone who comes to these feasts must not come empty-handed. We can find this in Exodus 23 and in Deuteronomy 16. So now Yeshua, like I said, he has no gifts that he would have brought. He just woke up from the grave. But he himself is the Wave Sheaf offering. Why is he the Wave Sheaf offering? When we look at the law concerning the Wave Sheaf offering, in Leviticus 23, verses 10 to 14. And it says, when you enter the land that I am going to give you, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf, which is a single bundle, of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before Jehovah, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice a burnt offering unto Jehovah, a lamb a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made to Jehovah by fire, a pleasing aroma, and a drink offering of 1/4 of a hin. You must not eat any bread or any grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. This is in Leviticus 23, verses 10 to 14. Also, in Numbers chapter 15, verses 18 to 25, we hear Jehovah giving Moses the same instruction concerning when they enter into the land. And he says to Moses, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you come into the land that I'm bringing you, then it shall be that when you eat of the bread of the land, you shall offer up a heave offering unto Jehovah. That word is Heave, heave. You shall offer up a cake of the first of your dough for a heave offering. As you do the heave offering of the threshing floor, so shall you heave it. Of the first of your dough you shall give unto Jehovah an heave offering in your generations. And if you have erred and not observed all these commandments which Jehovah has spoken unto Moses, even all that Jehovah has commanded you by the hand of Moses, from the day that Jehovah commanded Moses, and henceforth among your generations, then it shall be, if aught be committed by ignorance, without the knowledge of the congregation, that all the congregation shall offer one young bullock for a burnt offering, for a sweet savor unto Jehovah, with his meat offering and his drink offering, according to the manner, and one kid of the goats for a sin offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for all the congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them, for it is ignorance, and they shall bring their offering, a sacrifice made by fire unto Jehovah, and their sin offering before Jehovah for their ignorance. That's verse 25. So I read this in Numbers chapter 15 to lay the groundwork for the heave offering. So I said earlier that Yeshua resurrected with nothing in his hands. And now he's the high priest and he is going up. He is also the first of all first fruits. So as the first of all first fruits, he is the wave sheaf offering. So remember, the commandment was that the priest must bring one barley sheaf and wave it before the altar of Jehovah. And that's in Leviticus 23. We read that in verses 10 to 14. So now Yeshua has to go up and present himself before Jehovah as the wave sheaf offering. He is the first of all first fruits. That's the wave sheaf offering. It is a single bundle, okay? And he goes up. It is an unleavened bread. This is the feast in which he is being offered up, unleavened, and this is on the day of wave sheaf offering. But Feast of Unleavened Bread is also a pilgrimage feast. And as we read earlier in Deuteronomy 16:16 and in Exodus 23:15, Jehovah says, all the males who attend this feast must not come before him empty-handed. That means do not come without a gift. Here in Numbers 15, he is telling them that in addition to the wave sheaf offering that they're supposed to come before the altar and wave, they're also to do the heave offering. Heav as in Victor, heave offering. So what is a heave offering? The heave offering is the gift. It's a present. The word for the heave offering is teruma, an offering or a present, an offering made as a present. So the other offerings that Jehovah was telling them to do in Exodus 29, he told them in verse 26 to I think 28 were from the heave offerings that he was telling them to present were from the harvest. They were also to slaughter a ram as a consecration sacrifice and to wave up the breast as a wave offering, but the shoulder of the ram was supposed to be offered to him as a heave offering. And this heave offering was to be presented presented to him as from the children of Israel. And this was from the sacrifice of their peace offering, because the ram is the peace offering. So 3 times per year, the males must come up, and these 3 times are the pilgrimage feasts. And they must do this. Now, Yeshua, like I said, he resurrected and his hands are empty, okay? But he has been keeping God's laws all his life. He has never sinned. And now he is resurrecting on the day that he must perform his high priestly duties. He's going up now to the temple in heaven to present himself on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a pilgrimage feast. So the law still stands that he must not come before Jehovah empty-handed. Remember, the laws that have been done away with now are not these laws. The laws that have been done away with is the atonement laws for the sins of man. No longer will they be killing animals for the atonement of sins for man. No longer will they be shedding blood to do that, because Yeshua's blood was already shed. But life goes on in the kingdom of God under the laws of God, because remember, Yeshua said, I did not come to abolish the law. So the law is still standing except for those that he has already fulfilled. But now he needs to fulfill this one, because it's not yet fulfilled. He has not yet gone up to heaven to present himself as the first of the first fruits. And he now is the first of the first fruit, which is symbolized by the wave sheaf offering. So when he goes up to present himself, he must not come empty-handed. According to the order of Melchizedek, the priesthood, they are not confined to one duty only. They do just about everything. So now he's going to present himself. After he has already given his blood, he is now resurrected. He's going to present himself, but he must not come without a gift, which is a heave offering. And this heave offering is made as a present. It is motioned not like the wave offering, which is motioned horizontally from side to side, but the heave offering is motioned up and down before the altar of Jehovah, and it is offered to him as a gift, acknowledging that he is a ruler of heaven. And the wave offering, coming from the agriculture or the harvest, is presented to him, waved before him, acknowledging that he is the ruler of the earth. So now the first of the first fruit must be offered in the harvest time, and the heave offering must also be offered on the same day. So Yeshua now is going up to present himself as the wave sheaf offering, but he will also present a heave offering to Jehovah. And guess where he's getting that heave offering from? The people who resurrected from the grave, who were walking towards the holy city. They were going towards the holy city because he will be taking them up, and they are the first fruits of that harvest. Now, I believe that Jehovah knows how he has arranged, organized, and orchestrated the gifts that are supposed to come to him on his concerning his first fruits. So I believe that this group of people who were resurrected, that information about them is known only to Jehovah and Yeshua. Because as much as I've searched the teachings of Yeshua and I have searched the teachings of the apostles, I have not found anything concerning who these people are and why this resurrection is taking place before the resurrection of those who belong to Yeshua. So these people obviously belong to Jehovah, but what is the relationship with Yeshua, I cannot speak to eloquently, because all I can think about them is They were the people who saw through the feasts of Jehovah and saw that it all pointed to Yeshua. They understood the Messiah in all these feasts. They understood the salvation and how everything would happen based on the prophets and the laws and the feasts. So they must have had a good understanding of it. So they were worthy to be resurrected on the day of first fruits, on the day of the Wave Sheaf offering, so that Yeshua could bring them up to heaven as a heave offering. So the resurrected saints who came up out of the grave are the offering Yeshua will present to Jehovah as a heave offering. The other point I want to make about this is, if Yeshua should show up in the temple of heaven and not fulfill this portion of the Torah like he was supposed to after his resurrection, then according to Numbers chapter 15, which we just read, then the priest would have to make an atonement for the breaking of the law. Because what is sin? Transgression of the law. So Yeshua would have been guilty of transgressing God's law. But because Jehovah made the preparation for him, he does not show up to the temple in heaven empty-handed. Instead, he comes with a gift, and the gift is the heave offering. So let's move on. What we have seen so far in our study is that the feasts of Jehovah, his holy days, outline his plan for salvation for mankind through the works of his son Yeshua. Among the many annual festivals or feast days of Jehovah, there are 3 pilgrimage feasts that coincide with 3 harvests of the land each year. The first pilgrimage feast is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is 7 days in duration. The barley harvest begins in the early spring, and it is the first harvest of the year that coincides with this first annual pilgrimage feast of unleavened bread. The wheat harvest is the next harvest, which begins in late spring and coincides with the second annual spring pilgrimage feast of Shavuot, or otherwise known as Pentecost. Then there is a third harvest, which coincides with the fall feast of Sukkot, or Feast of Tabernacles. This is the third and last pilgrimage feast of the year. Now, the instructions that Jehovah gave to Moses regarding this Wave Sheaf day is very specific. In Leviticus 23 and verse 10 to 14, we just read it. Now, this instruction was given to the children of Israel by Moses before they entered into the promised land. They've been traveling for 40 years. But this instruction had to be taught to them, and they had to memorize it and know it so that when they got into the land, they knew exactly what to do. We see that they did get to the land under Joshua, and in Joshua 5, we see what they did when they got there. This was the 10th day of the month of Aviv, and now they have only 4 days before they must observe the Passover. So only 4 days, but from the time of circumcision to the time of Passover. So he said, when you enter the land, I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest. Now remember, they have not been living in the land. They have not been there before, except to spy it out. And when you enter into the land that I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest, which means this harvest they're about to reap, it's a harvest of seeds they did not plant. Verse 10. When you enter the land I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf A sheaf is a single bundle. The harvest we're talking about is the barley harvest, because this is the first harvest of the spring harvest. That's the barley harvest. And so they're going to go with their sickle, and they're going to find the best sheaf that they can find, and they're going to cut that and bring a single bundle of the first grain you harvest to the priest. He is to wave the sheaf before Jehovah, so it will be accepted on your behalf. Your behalf meaning on behalf of the children of Israel. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. Now, it was the 10th day of Aviv when they got there, and Jehovah told Joshua, the men have not been circumcised because they were not with the first batch of men who got circumcised coming out of Egypt. This is the new generation, and the old generation died off in the wilderness. So he needed to circumcise these men. They got circumcised on the day they got there. The minute they hit the ground, Jehovah says to Joshua, get your flint knives, and it's time to circumcise these guys. They're all of military age. They have not been circumcised before. They cannot take part in the Passover unless they are circumcised. That's the law. So Jehovah is timing everything. Now, when they entered into the land, as we can see from Joshua chapter 5, they entered in on the 10th day of the first month. On the 14th day of the first month, they are expected to observe the Passover. So they only have 4 days. Okay, so now that they're circumcised, they have 4 days to heal. This is on the 10th. They're coming in. They just got there. They just set up tent. You got to be circumcised tonight. You have 4 days in which to heal. And if you're not healed well, at least you're circumcised. You're able to observe the Passover. Okay, so once the day of Passover is done, then the next day, the day after the Passover, that means now we're talking about the 15th. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. Okay, I just read Joshua chapter 5 verses 10 and 11. Now, let's go back to Leviticus 23 verses 10 to 14. We started reading, and let's pick up from where we left off. Okay, so the priest is to wave the sheaf before Jehovah, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. We're seeing here that if the priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath, in Leviticus 23, verse 11, and then we go to Joshua 5 and verse 11, and we see that the priest has already waved it on the day after the Passover. If he's supposed to wave it the day after the Sabbath, that means the Passover must have fallen on the Sabbath. In verse 12, as we continue to read, it says, on the day you wave the sheaf, you must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. So between Joshua chapter 5 verses 10 to 11 and Leviticus 23 verses 10 to 14, we're seeing what experience the children of Israel had in the promised land. The instructions say you must not eat any bread or any new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God, talking about the wave sheaf offering. Yet, Joshua is telling us that the very next day they were eating this new grain, roasted and unleavened bread. So that means that when they observed the Passover, Passover must have fallen on the Sabbath, because the very next day they were able to wave it, and Jehovah says, you cannot eat any of the grain until after you have offered the wave sheaf. You have waved the sheaf, and it is accepted by Jehovah on your behalf. So this tells us that by the time the 14th came, it was the Sabbath, because he said this can only be offered after the Sabbath. He says here, he is to wave the sheaf before Jehovah, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. The fact that they are eating it the following day means this day is after the Sabbath, because the wave sheaf, it has to be done on the first day of the week. All right, it is the first day of the week. They have offered the wave sheaf, and now they're eating from the grain of the land, new grain from the harvest, which they could now eat once they waved it before Jehovah, and their offering is accepted. This year, we had a problem with some of the Messianic groups because they did not know when the wave sheaf offering day was going to fall. They didn't know which day it would be. The reason was that Passover fell on the Sabbath. And when the Passover fell on the Sabbath, people were calculating and said, well, wave sheaf, we have to wait until after the Sabbath for wave sheaf, but they did not count the Sabbath that Passover fell on. And so they were waiting for another Sabbath to come, which that Sabbath would put them outside of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, Jehovah requires that the priest bring the barley from the first fruit of the harvest and wave it before his altar for his acceptance first on the first day, which is the day after the Sabbath. Now, unleavened bread is only 7 days. And so if the Passover is on the Sabbath and unleavened bread is going to be the day after Passover, then unleavened bread is going to start on Sunday. If unleavened bread starts on Sunday and it is 7 days long, then the last day of unleavened bread would be on a Saturday. So in order to obey the wave sheaf day, in order to be obedient to Jehovah's command to wave the sheaf before Jehovah on the day that he says we must do it, then we would have missed it. Because if unleavened bread is already done, because unleavened bread would have been the first day on Sunday, the seventh day on the Sabbath, then the day after the Sabbath would not be a day that Jehovah would accept, because it doesn't fall within the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is where he wants it to be. And so if we go outside of the Feast of Unleavened Bread to offer the wave sheaf offering, then we're not offering first fruits. So this year we had an issue where we had a guest at our assembly who said he was not going to observe the Feast of Pentecost when we were observing it, because the count of when the wave sheaf day was 1 week later in his count. And I think Michael Rood had the same issue where they counted it 1 week later. But when we see the example that Joshua had when he entered into the promised land here in Joshua chapter 5, we see that the Passover was on that Sabbath and the wave sheaf offering was the first day of the week, immediately the day after the Sabbath. So I just wanted to bring that up because the Bible explains itself. And when we are confused about something because we don't see it clearly in this one chapter of Leviticus 23, we can get the answer from how did they do it? What were the situations? Did this situation ever happen before? And how do we handle it today? Where can we find the answer of how did it happen before and how was it treated? This is, in Joshua chapter 5, is the way that Jehovah approved of handling it. Joshua did not disobey God's law because the Passover fell on the Sabbath, and he went ahead and observed the first fruits the day of the Wave Sheaf offering the following day, which was the first day of the week. Joshua did not wait until after the unleavened bread week was done and do the Wave Sheaf offering on the following week, because that was not necessary, because Jehovah said the day after the Sabbath. And because the Wave Sheaf day must fall on the day after the Sabbath, then Joshua would have had to wait until the end or the last day of unleavened bread. Because if Passover falls on a Sunday, that means the first day of unleavened bread is on a Monday, which means the seventh day of unleavened bread would fall on a Sunday, which would be the day after the Sabbath. Unleavened bread is 7 days. If Passover fell on a Monday, then the Tuesday, the day after, could not be Wave Sheaf Day because it is not the day after the Sabbath. They would have to wait till the 6th day of unleavened bread, because the first day of unleavened bread would be a Tuesday. Then you would have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, which would be the 5th day. And then the 6th day would be the Sunday, and that day would be the Wave Sheaf Day. If Passover fell on a Tuesday, then the Wave Sheaf Day would fall on the 5th day of unleavened bread. It's just a matter of counting till you get to the Sabbath. And then the day after the Sabbath would be the Wave Sheaf Day. If Passover fell on a Wednesday, like it did on the year that Yeshua was crucified, then the Wave Sheaf Day would fall on a Sunday, which would be the day after Yeshua resurrected, which was the Sabbath, which would be the 4th day of unleavened bread. But in the future, when we run into a situation like this again, where Passover fell on the Sabbath, then we should no longer have the confusion. I'm hoping that everybody who ran into that problem this year would have by now found a way to study and get the right answer. Okay? There's no need for compromise, and there's no need to have to, oh, I don't know if I get it right, so I'm going to do it again. It's a matter of looking into the Word and see how it was done. When they got into the promised land, what did Joshua do? When they got there, it was 4 days before Passover. Passover fell on the Sabbath, and Wave Sheaf was the exact day after that, the Sunday, the first day of the week. Okay, so I thought I would bring that up because this year some people were celebrating on the correct day and other people were waiting for a week later, and the calendars were just going crazy with people giving their whole different explanation about linear this and linear that. You know, Father has made it very simple for us. He says the day after the Sabbath. We had the Sabbath on Passover, so the next day, though it is the first day of unleavened bread, it is also the first day of the week. When did Joshua go ahead and cut or reap the Wave Sheaf? Obviously, he had to do it between the Sabbath and the first day of unleavened bread. Now, the argument that I heard was, oh, unleavened bread is no working day, so you cannot go ahead and cut a sheaf of barley on the Sabbath, on the first day of unleavened bread. That was one of the arguments that I heard. However, when you go back to the Bible and you look at Joshua 5, we know that on the Sabbath, the 7th day Sabbath, that's also a non-working day. So we had 2 non-working days back to back, yet they still were able to wave the sheaf, the barley sheaf. they still were able to wave it. So it's not, I think Father prefers obedience over sacrifice. Okay, so let's not fall prey to our own reasoning and end up sacrificing instead of obeying. He said the day after the Sabbath. If he says so, hey, do it. If it's that evening, because remember that they were circumcised. And so they were laid up. They couldn't get out and do a whole lot of stuff while they were circumcised. They were in pain. They couldn't go out to the fields and do a whole bunch of stuff. So obviously, they must have done it either the evening of Sabbath or first thing on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So Jehovah required Israel to offer the wave sheaf every year at the beginning of the spring barley harvest, before the people reaped the harvest. The wave sheaf is his portion of this harvest. It is just one bundle of barley stalks taken from, with fruit on it, with the best fruit that they could find, taken from the first and best of the crop. And after he accepted the wave sheaf offering, the people were then free to go and reap their portion of the harvest. The wave sheaf is a pivotal point in the spring feast of Jehovah because it connects the barley harvest to the Feast of First Fruits, also known as Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks. Jehovah instituted his festivals and commanded Israel to observe and celebrate them, to teach them about his salvation plan for mankind. But they didn't understand that the festivals were parables. They did not see the Messiah in all of their rehearsal ceremonies every year. But now that Yeshua has come and fulfilled the spring feast, we are able to see the symbols in these parables and correctly interpret them to be symbols of Yeshua and his works of redemption, justification, purification, and salvation. While the Passover is crucial to our salvation and redemption by itself, it is not the complete process of our salvation and redemption. And it does not complete, because it does not complete the work of Yeshua according to Jehovah's plan of salvation for mankind. And this is why the pilgrimage feast of unleavened bread is so important. It is the parable of Yeshua's resurrection. Yeshua actually did resurrect, but in the feast, they were unable to see that. His acceptance by the Father after his resurrection as the wave sheaf offering was waved before the altar of Jehovah for acceptance. And once he was resurrected and traveled, ascended to heaven, and presented himself as the wave sheaf offering and was accepted by Jehovah, he was endowed with power, authority, and dominion, because he was found to be worthy. So the gospel of the kingdom of God that Yeshua preached, though it was for everyone who would believe and accept his message of salvation for the whole world, his primary job in doing the will of God was to save the sons of God. That means the children of God. For this reason, he taught in parables. And Jehovah gave the feasts of Jehovah to the children of Israel also in parables. Parables were used to help relay an understanding or information that was easily grasped by the common day language, because of its common day language that was used. Yeshua taught in parables, and everybody who heard the parables thought they understood what he was saying. They understood because when he talked about farming and he talked about sowing seeds, they were already acquainted with that. And so they understood, yeah, that makes sense. You have to plant the seed in fertile ground for it to grow. If you plant it on ground that is not good, it will not grow. But the interpretation of the parable is what was missing. If they didn't understand what the parable was saying, then they missed the lesson. And in this case, the children of Israel missed the lesson of what was being taught through the feast days because they were presented as parables, and those who did not understand were blinded. Their eyes were blinded. It's because their eyes were blinded. They didn't get it. But there were many who got it. And we can tell that because of the heave offering that Yeshua took up to heaven with him to present to Jehovah for the people who resurrected, because those people were part of the first fruit that was resurrected on the day of first fruits. And so, though the parable of the feast days were intended and geared to teach the children of Israel, who are supposed to be the sons of God, to teach them about God's salvation plan, they did not hear it, they did not see it, they didn't understand it, because they didn't have eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand it. And the parables reveal the secrets or mysteries of God, which are meant to be shared with the children of God only. So anyone who missed it, obviously, didn't have eyes to see, didn't have ears to hear, didn't have a heart to understand. And then Yeshua, he came, and in delivering the gospel of the kingdom, he also used parables. And his disciples said, "Why do you speak in parables?" And in Matthew chapter 13, when they had this discussion, he said that he spoke in parables because what he had to say was meant only for the children of God, not for the rest, because they, the rest, didn't have eyes to see, didn't have ears to hear, and didn't have a heart to understand. So Yeshua fulfilled his physical assignment in the year that he was crucified by his teachings, by his sufferings, by his death, his burial, and resurrection. And since the time of his resurrection, he has been performing his spiritual assignments or his spiritual duties. His physical and spiritual work together formed the bridge that fills the gap between God and man to reconcile man to God. Because remember what the angel said at the birth of Yeshua. He said, "Peace on earth, goodwill towards men." And that is the heart of Jehovah towards man. He did all this planning ahead of time, even before he started creation. He had all this planned out. And God's plan is in the mind of God. It is a secret because he only reveals it to his children. And so we read through the scriptures and we see things, and then when we hear the voice of Jehovah, of Yeshua, the Spirit teaching us, explaining, that's what that means. Oh, I get it now. That's how we receive the revelation. We receive the understanding of the secrets of God. Now, those who are outside of the kingdom see these as mysteries, and not mysteries as secrets, but mysteries as, oh, you can never understand it. You will never get the understanding of it because it is way too mysterious. That is not true. Because Jehovah intends for all of his children to understand his mind and his heart. He has placed his mind in Yeshua, who conveys the meaning and teaches us what Jehovah wants us to know based on the gospel that Yeshua preaches, and that he expects us to go and preach and teach like he did. So when we understand all the things that has happened, all the activities that the feasts of Jehovah requires, and the laws and how to obey them, then we know that every step of the process is a step that mirrors or parallels what he is doing in the spiritual, not just the physical. The physical is a parallel of what is happening in the spiritual realm. So when he plants the seed is the word. The soil that he plants the seed in is the heart. The condition of the soil is the condition of the heart. So Yeshua has done the same thing as his Father has done in teaching us using parables, but explaining them. Jehovah has done the same thing, giving us these feast days in parables, but at the same time explaining them to us. But the only people who are getting the understanding and they are seeing and knowing what the symbols are and what they represent are the sons of God who have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the heart to understand. Next time, we're going to focus on the Feast of Pentecost. This is, in the Bible, referred to as the Feast of Harvest, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of First Fruits. Today, we could not get into that because that is a big lesson in itself. And today, I just wanted to cover the Wave Sheaf offering and the heave offering and Yeshua's role after his resurrection. So I hope you were able to get something valuable out of the lesson today. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for participating, and I hope you were blessed and that you now have a better understanding of Wave Sheaf and at least learned about the heave offering. And I look forward to our next lesson when we will cover the gospel of the kingdom relative to the Feast of Pentecost. So I pray that Jehovah will bless you and keep you and give you eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand his secrets. And as he continues to lead you in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. So this is Hillary saying bye for now until next time.